keeping you up to speed on all your Colorado teams. It's time for Coffee Break.
The holiday weekend is over. The NFL's Final Four is set, and there's been a lot of traction on the front of the coaching carousel and personnel moves being made across the league, and there's no one better to dig into a lot of that too than our friend of the show, NFL insider to the stars, James Palmer. James, how are you, man?
I'm good, brother. I'm good. It's I'll take that back. I'm great.
You should be after last night.
I know you guys won the national championship
Yeah.
last night, so
Yeah.
I am in a pretty good mood. Yeah.
You are a very well-spoken, well-stated Buckeyes fan, and they were able to get it done in, I think, a game that ended up being a little bit closer on the scoreboard than it felt like for 3.5 quarters.
Yeah.
But for all intents and purposes, that was a little bit of a snoozer if you're an Ohio State fan.
Yeah, well, in the middle, I was questioning my fandom because I started doing work. I had a bunch of shows to tape this morning with my buddy Steve Smith for our 89 show, and I was like, we're doing some work, and then I was like, whoa, JP, get back to the game. Start concentrating. This is becoming close.
Lock in.
Then Notre Dame attempted a field goal for no reason at all.
Yeah.
And then I felt a little more comfortable. But then we got way too conservative in the second half, like way too conservative. But as a whole, it was a blast to see us win the national championship after losing to Michigan during the regular season, which is a real bummer. Great to see Jeremiah Smith out there. Anybody who watched the game can see that last route, by the way. Like, I was talking to a receiver coach who just texted me that night, last night, and was just like, that's an NFL route, like the one that won the game. Just to push him inside, he's already at inside leverage, the corner, just to ride him in, and then he's like, he'd be the number one pick in this draft, clearly. I don't think anybody doubts that, honestly. I'm that serious. Now, if you have the number one pick and you need a quarterback and you love one of these quarterbacks, of course that. But like, he in a lot of people's minds, he would be the number one pick in this draft. Like, that's how good Jeremiah Smith is.
Wow. Yeah, we haven't seen a receiver go number one overall since Keyshawn Johnson, right? That would be a couple decades worth. So, James, you touched on it a little bit there. I think as a fellow Big Ten fan, Big Ten alum, I think the one thing we can just agree on up front is that anything is better than seeing the University of Michigan have success. But on that note, as somebody who pulls for Ohio State, how does it feel? Does the national championship glow soften the sting of losing to Michigan again on what's become a little bit of a troublesome pattern over the last 3 years or so? Or is there a section of the fan base that you're a part of where it's like, yeah, the national championship is great, but this game means more?
The national championship means more.
I agree.
So few teams win national championship. I would say it definitely means more. I think winning. Listen, we won the first college football playoff ever.
Mm-hmm.
We won that in 2014. And then now they expand it to 12, and we win the first one of that. I think those two championships, mean more than obviously losing to Michigan, which is a real bummer. But now with so much postseason play and the team of 12, and like it now has a little bit more of a NFL feel. Like, get into the dance and then see what happens, right? And it used to be not only that it's the best rivalry in sports, it was if you lose that game, your national title hopes are over. That's the way it used to be. And that's why the game also had such an added importance. But now, like, if you can just get into the playoff, and then I take more pride. I know we lost to a crummy Michigan team, but I take more pride in like beating Tennessee and Oregon and Texas and then Notre Dame. Like, that's a murderer's row of defenses specifically, but really good college football programs, and then get a chance to win. So I think like we're sliding more and more towards this NFL world in college football with the pay, with all of these things, and we can get into it with the Broncos or anybody else in terms of draft. Like, you're getting different college players coming into the NFL now. And I think a lot of people around the league think that's a good thing. They know how to manage money. They're essentially pro athletes before they get here. You're getting a much more polished kid oftentimes. And if they can't handle the money or they can't handle certain things, those are now much more glaring, and there's easier way to tell them as opposed to that being an unknown in a player you're drafting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to point out that as we've been known to do the last handful of weeks, I want to do another James Palmer AMA here toward the back end of the show. So I just wanted to give the note out to all of our listeners out there. Go ahead and start firing your questions in. Trey and James will get them in the queue. But until then, while we wait for that, James, we saw the NFL's Final Four kind of cement into place. We now know what conference championship looks like. Conference championship weekend looks like for both sides. And I think all eyes, more eyes, I would say, are going to be on the AFC side of the conference championship matchup because of the storylines that play there, with the Chiefs on their quest for a three-peat, which has never been done in the Super Bowl era, and Josh Allen, the prospective MVP, candidate, the favorite if you look at a lot of polling. And, his opportunity to finally get over the hump against a guy who's ended his postseason runs with some pretty impressive teams 3 times now, I believe.
3 times. Yep. 3 times. I'm going to be at that game. Part of me wanted to go see Jaden Daniels against that Eagles defense.
An awesome story in its own right.
Unbelievable. Yeah, this is the best rookie season we've ever seen in the history of the league, in all honesty. I really think so. I mean, I know Andrew Luck had a great rookie year. I mean, C.J. Stroud last year was outstanding in his rookie year. But, I mean, we're on the precipice of a rookie quarterback going to the Super Bowl. I mean, this is...
Yeah, one game away now.
One game away now. And you could say that 5, 6 players on the Commanders would start for the Eagles.
Yep.
That's the discrepancy in rosters. I think that shows you even further what Jaden Daniels is doing. To go into Detroit and beat that team shows you even further what Jaden Daniels is doing. You blitz him, he's unbelievable. 3rd and 4th down, he's outstanding. And so I think that's a great storyline. But you're right. I think it's Mahomes going for three-peat, and it's Josh Allen coming in, I think, completely different than he has in the previous times he's faced Mahomes in the postseason. He's not carrying a team. He's playing on schedule. He's protecting the football. He's making plays with his legs when they need to happen, not just frantically. I think this is just a different Bills team than we've seen in years past play this Chiefs team. But this Chiefs team just finds ways to win. It's unbelievable. Being there, I picked the Texans to win. And I just kind of thought, I got a lot of crap, by the way. Standing on the sidelines at Arrowhead, I was getting abused by the Chiefs Kingdom yelling at me because they all, I guess, somehow knew I picked the Texans. But they don't turn the ball over. They play great in all 3 phases. I think this is something we could look at with the Broncos. How do you steal games at times? They stole that game from the Texans solely because of special teams. Texans did not perform in that phase, and the Chiefs somehow always find a way to. And that was a wild game, so I'm excited for that AFC Championship game. There, we can break it down if you want. I don't know if anybody.
Yeah, no, I mean it was. You bring up special teams. I mean, it was a special teams gaffe that prevented the Broncos from handing the Chiefs their first loss of the season at one point in this past year. And so, yeah, I'm a big believer in. While I do think that the Chiefs have benefited from some fortuitous kind of happenstance or a little bit of luck. And then I am a big believer in you have to put yourself in a position to be lucky.
Agreed.
And I think that the Chiefs have done a pretty good job of that. James, as it relates to Kansas City, there's been a lot of discourse going on about the officiating of Patrick Mahomes in particular, and some of the kind of fortuitous circumstances that I just mentioned, where it feels like the Chiefs maybe get bailed out of stalled drives or bad plays, and kind of keeping them alive in situations where they may sputter. What have you made of the timing and the nature of some of these calls, particularly as it relates to Patrick Mahomes when it comes to roughing the passer, unnecessary roughness, where we saw 2 big moments in that Houston Texans game?
Yeah, and let's be clear, I they mattered for sure. I believe the first roughing the passer on Will Anderson Jr. led to a field goal on that drive, or else it would have been a 3 and out. And then I will say the other one where Mahomes danced around past the line of scrimmage, where talking to Will Anderson in the locker room after the game, and I think he's 100% right in this. He's like, he's a runner now. He's a runner. And then he slides late, and I'm not accusing Patrick of anything. I think this is the way soccer works, right? This is a smart play. Can I draw the penalty? Let's see.
Yes.
And I think he plays that way a little bit. I think a lot of guys do. And it makes opposing fan bases hate you. It's also an aspect of the game. And that was 1st and 10 with a long way to go. That drive ended in a touchdown. So that's 10 points essentially, right there. But I mean, that was first down, right? Like that didn't keep the drive alive.
No, not in that particular instance.
Not at that particular moment, right? But I definitely think people view this way. I covered the Patriots for a long time when Brady was there, and this is the exact same vibe. It's the exact same feeling of they're going to get every call. They don't get every call. They put themselves in position to make plays. And I think what the discrepancy in this is, it's similar to what I just said earlier. They don't make mistakes. So when you make mistakes against them, they're usually exaggerated in the perception, right? Because you're not seeing them make mistakes in big moments very often. They don't hit quarterbacks late very often. They don't get flagged for undisciplined actions very often, because that's the culture they've built and the way that they've been coached. And I think that's a feather in the cap of Andy Reid and his staff. Now, I think that makes these plays that happen adversely magnified, right? Because they play such disciplined football. But I do think, like, I thought Joe Buck and Troy Aikman called a great game. I thought Troy was outstanding. Because I always listen when I'm in the press box to the game while I'm watching. And I thought Troy was really good. He was honest and calling things out when he believed they should have been called out. And this is what we're going to deal with Kansas City. Like, if you're not a fan of the Chiefs, this is what you're going to deal with for probably some time moving forward.
Yeah, I agree with you on the Aikman front. I think that his bluntness and honesty is a little bit refreshing in a sense of like not empathizing, but echoing some of the sentiments of what he knows and we know people who are watching at home are feeling, and just kind of making those parallels there. That you don't always see from a broadcast that can be kind of sterile at times because of their impartial nature to it.
Can I jump in real quick? Because you reminded me of something real quick. I'll say this really fast. Following TweetDeck and all the different columns I have, the one thing that was very interesting is I know fans get very, very upset at a lot of these Mahomes calls. This is now getting to a point, though, where I'm seeing like beat reporters and national reporters that not our analysts, not like Skip Bayless or somebody like that. Respected, covering
not talking
the NFL
heads.
Covering the NFL for 30, 40 years. They're writers, and they're voicing their opinion on like this is getting out of control. I think that is something that has shown us that it's gotten to another level.
Yeah, and I think that that's only fueled or exacerbated by, you have Texans players and D'Amico Ryans after the game basically insinuating it. I didn't love that approach. I think when you take the L, you kind of keep it with your chin up and you move on, because by and large, the Texans, in my opinion, didn't play well enough for large stretches of that game to beat a team like Kansas City. But I will say this. I do think that it's something that is not going away. And I think it's something that we are going to see potentially get worse as the eyeballs and the TV numbers. We saw that Chiefs-Texans game is the most watched ESPN NFL game in history for that network. And when you factor in the dollars and cents, which is ultimately what everything comes down to, this isn't going to go away. And so while I do think it's a problem, I think you really have to parse through who is at fault and who is the agent for change with these problems. So I think first and foremost, it comes with the competition committee. I mean, they're the ones that set the league's competition committee in conjunction with the NFL is who sets these guidelines and these rules. And we've seen, you mentioned the New England Patriots and Tom Brady, really since Tom Brady went down in like week 1 of whatever that season was, and when Matt Castle, the ACL, that was really, I think, the first true genesis point of where we saw the overprotection of quarterbacks, start, and it's been snowballing ever since. But, when you slow things down, which is not like watching it in real time, that you see the Texans players hit each other and not really Mahomes, and is that easy to see on the field? And you have human element and human error to these officiatings. All of that is a factor. So if we really want to see change, I think it's got to start with the competition committee. But I do want to say that I don't think Patrick Mahomes is necessarily off the hook in some of this stuff, because I think we've seen him at times, even though he's denied it. And I think you could make at least a reasonable argument, if you wanted to, that he was baiting a flag with that out of bounds run where he slowed up and then kind of, baited the player to push him out of bounds when it was right there on the sideline, leaving it up to a judgment call for the officials. And I think there's two ways to look at that. One, he's a savvy player for knowing what the guidelines and the rules are and trying to wiggle, the best that he can within there. We saw James Harden do that in the NBA with the double step 3-pointer that was basically a travel every time. Or, frankly, I think we see a little bit of this with a name that, as a Philly guy, you're probably familiar with like a Joel Embiid. I think that somebody who...
The Joel Embiid hate here in Denver. Okay.
Yeah, James, it's bad. It's bad. You're not going to see him again tonight, by the way. He hasn't played in Denver since 2019. But regardless, I don't want to get sidetracked on that.
Died.
I do feel like there is some culpability, on Mahomes' part. But again, if you don't allow rules and situational football like that to be exploited as easily as it is now, maybe there's less incentive to exploit it. So one thing that I feel for sure is that I do think it's a problem, and I do think that some of the gripes are worth griping over. I just don't see, without some pretty significant rule change, what's going to get better about it.
Yeah, and I don't think you need to dramatically change rules, right? You need to change how you officiate some of these rules. Like the ability to have New York, or the eye in the sky as they call them sometimes, get in the officials' ear immediately after they get a chance in New York to watch all the replays of the Will Anderson roughing the passer call and just go pick the flag up. That's not a roughing the passer. And all the referees need to say is, upon further booth review, there was no foul on the play. Like, to just throw that out there, you can do that, right? Like it's a bang bang play. I understand how tough this is on the officials, but when you can review certain plays and there's other plays you can't, and a roughing the passer and 15 yards, and it's a big deal, to where Will Anderson hits him in the shoulder, why can't they just change the way that rule is officiated and how they get to conclusion of that rule? And I think to further exaggerate why we're having this conversation is like the play there wasn't a flag, where Mahomes was by the sideline and then flopped and dove dramatically out of bounds. If you're a Chiefs fan, or if you're Patrick Mahomes for that matter, I think you have to understand why people are angry.
Yeah,
I
agree.
I think you have to understand why opposing fans are upset with this. And so, yeah, I just think just the process of evaluating the rules and the way that it's done in the league obviously changes every single year. And maybe this is a loud enough conversation that something does change. We'll see. Yeah,
and I think that and this goes to, some admitted opinions and biases of mine. I typically loathe officiating in most sports. I just think that there are so many instances with the technological advancements that we have that make me look at the human error and human element that we allow in so many sports. Like, we have microchips in the football that can tell us down to the 10th of a mile per hour, the launch velocity, the trajectory angles, and all of that stuff of all these footballs. But we still got to drag a couple of old dudes out there with a chain link to tell me if it's a first down kind of thing. So admittedly, I think that, some of my opinions kind of fall into that category of why are we doing this? But I digress. I think that if you are like you said, if you're a Chiefs fan and what you're seeing in front of you, it kind of reminds me of, like, again, to relate it to somebody that I went through this with, is I've always been a big Draymond Green fan, Michigan State fellow alumni and all that, but acknowledging some of the antics that he, had pulled for large stretches, especially in the early and middle portions of his career, where he's kicking guys or he's going after the whistle or he's kind of being the guy that strikes first and doesn't get caught. I could at least acknowledge and say, hey, okay, that's my guy, and I'll admit a little bit of bias there, and I get it, but it's not like it's not obvious that there's some nefarious activity at work.
For sure. I totally agree. I wanted to respond to a couple of the comments I saw down there, like about the game and regarding things like you shouldn't let. One thing I wanted to throw out there, because this is insane, the Texans outgained the Chiefs by 124 yards, total yards. They committed 0 turnovers. Do you know what the record was of teams to outgain their opponent in the postseason by more than 100 yards and not turn the football over in the Super Bowl area?
I believe the teams that accomplished those things went 0-4.
The record, if you do this, if you outgain them by 100 yards and you commit 0 turnovers in the postseason, 46-0.
Wow.
It is now 46-1 because the Chiefs beat the Texans.
Oh, the Chiefs were the one.
Chiefs are now the one. The Chiefs were outgained by Houston by 124 yards. Stroud didn't turn the ball over, but you got to miss. You got to make your kicks. You got to play good special teams. You can't gift wrap them 3 points to start the game by a kickoff return that goes all the way, down into your own territory. These are the things I think make people frustrated with the Chiefs. Like that stat alone right there is why people get frustrated.
Especially,
with
and again, I think.
It, but you got to respect it a little bit of like just finding a way to win.
Yeah, no.
I think Bo does that a little bit in all honesty. Like Bo is already in one season started to figure out like, if I don't hurt the team, we have more opportunities for big gains, more opportunities for explosive plays. We have more opportunities if we're never playing behind the chains, if we're never playing catch up and we're in these games. I can make more plays if I don't try to do too much and put us in bad situations.
Yeah,
and I think that's the quarterback that Mahomes has become in all honesty. He used to run around like a crazy person and make these unbelievable throws into space of Tyreek Hill and stuff. If you look at the way he plays the game now, he gets sacked very little. He hasn't turned the football over since November 17th. That was against the Bills. Went through 2 picks. Like, he's learned that if you do these things, you just increase your chances of winning. I think Bo's actually kind of learned that in one season, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I think for those, then I'm seeing the comments there about like Houston missed 2 field goals, and I got it. I mean, I acknowledge from the front.
Well, the other field goal they missed did not matter to the game.
I don't think Houston, by and large, played well enough to truly win the game when it's all said and done. But 2 things can be true at the same time. I mean, that can be acknowledged, and then you can also acknowledge that it feels like, based on what your eyeballs would tell you, that there is a difference in the way that contact with Patrick Mahomes in the pocket and as a runner is officiated differently than the shots we see guys like Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels and Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen take, where it feels like, and again, I don't have like a specific data breakdown, but it feels like Jared Goff in the game that they lost, or even in this Washington, this Washington game at the start of the postseason, it feels like those guys are taking, hits that would, I mean, it becomes a joke on social media, but it feels like they're taking pretty big hits. And then we see a situation where Patrick Mahomes doesn't even actually come in major contact with a defender, and it draws a penalty. So 2 things can be true, while it's acknowledged that Houston wasn't quite where they're at. James,
I thought their defense played well. I thought Houston's defense played well.
Yeah, I mean, as well as in some ways, as well as you might be able to ask when you're given the task of guarding against a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, who still has weapons like Xavier Worthy and Travis Kelce and a lot of savvy offensive players who've won a lot at the highest level. And James, there's a sentiment going around, and I think it's fueled by comments from Texans players after the game, or just the general discourse.
I posted a lot of them.
the general discourse on social media. Do you think there could be an element, barring any changes in the way things are officiated, where we see a little bit, a dose of some frontier justice as it relates to the Chiefs, where, hey, if we're going to get called for a penalty, if Mahomes is going to slow up and try to bait a flag, for an unnecessary roughness, just go ahead and clean his clock. Just go ahead and get your, pound of flesh for it. If you think you're going to get a flag either way, do you see that potentially being a mindset or something that's adopted by players against the Chiefs?
Antonio Pierce said that this offseason. Like he said that's what they were going to do as a team and as a defense in Vegas. So like what you're saying is not, I guess, outside of the realm, because the head coach really wanted to go that route. I would say the other part of it is this, like talking to Will Anderson after the game, and I posted some of his comments, and I posted D'Amico's comments and Joe Mixon. I was there for all of those. I would say they were very upset with the refs. They went in with the mindset that they'd be up against the refs. But I would also say, because I got a lot of heat for posting this too, none of them said like they lost the game because of the refs.
Yeah. They
just knew that they'd be up against it in that sense. I think they do believe they made too many mistakes themselves to win the game. I think that's more the truth. So I kind of wanted to get that out there. But then the other part is, I asked Will Anderson, like, after that first roughing the passer, do you change how you play? Like, does that, because we oftentimes think of just the play and just the penalty. But if Mahomes is getting that call in the game, what's to say that doesn't change the way pass rushers approach him throughout the rest of the course of the game, right? And they ease up, and he knows they're going to ease up, and he can step into throws a little bit more confidently, and he knows he's not going to get hit as much. Like, And Will said, like, you can't really change how you play because then you're in a really difficult spot. I think that's what you do say. I don't know if that's entirely true with every player, that how this impacts you the rest of the game when these calls happen against you. So I think there's a larger impact than just the actual call and how this might benefit Kansas City. I'm not sure. But, like, I just do think that's all the different ways you can look at this.
I want to kick off the James Palmer AMA here with a question of my own as Trey gets ready to queue up the ones that we've got kind of in waiting.
And
James,
I'll try to go fast so we can get as many in as possible.
If the Buffalo Bills cannot take down the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship game, are they going to secure their three-peat? What's your level of confidence in teams that are not Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills to be able to beat Kansas City this year and prevent a three-peat from the Chiefs?
I think the easiest way to answer that is, of the 3 teams that are remaining that are not the Kansas City Chiefs, they're the 4th. The Bills are the best of the 3, probably, in terms of their chances to beat them. And it's wild for me to say that because I think Philly, and I've said this all year, has the best roster in football.
You have been consistent on that.
Yeah, I think they have the best roster in football. I just think Josh Allen has a better chance of beating him than Jalen Hurts does. Specifically, if Jalen Hurts' mobility is limited in any stretch after the knee injury. Now, granted, he'll have some time, and he's going to play in this championship game. But, like, I would say probably, I think there's a greater chance of them winning the Super Bowl than there is of winning this AFC Championship game.
How big is the drop off from Buffalo to Philly and or Washington after that in terms of?
I think there's a pretty sizable drop off from Buffalo to Washington specifically. Jalen Carter has been just incredible in Philadelphia. Like, this is the next coming of this is going to be blast. This is like the next coming of Aaron Donald. Like, honestly.
Wow.
And he's bigger than Aaron Donald. Like, AD was huge, but he wasn't very tall.
I was going to say, he's kind of like that muscle hamster.
Yeah, he was like wrestling figure where his arms are like huge and they go down to the ground. Jalen Carter is an enormous human being. And he won the game for Philadelphia over the Rams. And I'd love to see him go against that interior part of the line for Kansas City. But, like, Philly comes at you from every angle. It's a drop-off, but I don't think it's huge from Buffalo to Philadelphia.
All right. Trey, go ahead and queue up one of Tyler's questions here. Or David, perfect. VJ stays or goes based on your honest opinion from David, James. Vance Joseph's future.
I think he stays. I think he stays. First off, if he doesn't get a head coaching job and he departs somewhere else, that's a huge issue within the Broncos organization.
Yeah, it's an indictment.
Have a guy coach this well and run a defense that, to a man, they just say he's the reason they're playing this way. I'll just be honest. Like, I love that VJ's back in the cycle. I don't know if he gets one of the gigs. So I think there's a greater chance of him staying than leaving.
All right. Let's see. James, with the Broncos' needs and where they're drafting, are there any Buckeyes that could be a fit for the Broncos? Gosh. I think I have one in mind. I just don't know where he's going to go yet.
I'd get as many Buckeyes as you can get.
Yeah.
Man, the first one I would say is I don't know where he goes in the first round, but if you can get Caleb Downs, like, you don't hear a lot about him because nobody puts the football anywhere near him, but he's an unbelievable safety. He's the best safety in college football. He's probably one of the top 5 defensive players in college football. Why you want to get Jack Sawyer out there in the middle of that middle linebacker spot? Is that what you're?
I wouldn't hate it. No, and I'll be curious. What is his? I just thought of another name too, but I'm not sure if he's draft eligible or not. What's the situation with Emeka Egbuka? Is he a sophomore or is he coming out in the draft?
Oh no, he's a senior. He's the all-time catch leader. Yeah, he's been the number 2 for most of his career. I think he'd be an outstanding addition to the way the Broncos play, honestly, because he does everything right.
That was the name I had in mind.
Yeah, he doesn't really make any mistakes. He's a great blocker. Obviously, I say he doesn't make many mistakes, and he killed me with a fumble last night. But he does kind of a touch of everything. If you don't want to go out in free agency and pay for another compliment to Courtland, I would say he's a really probably safe pick, and you're not wasting a first-round pick on him either, which is, I think, I don't think he's a first-round pick. I haven't really asked around a whole bunch, but that would be somebody I'd look at for sure. Specifically with the pedigree he has, and he's used to playing the number 2. Like that's how many guys come into the league like prepared to be the number 2.
Sure.
He's been the Robin to let's go down the list. Garrett Wilson,
Marvin Harrison Jr.,
Jeremiah Smith. Like, he's used to being the guy that can make plays as the complement receiver. So I think there's a value in that.
All right, Trey, what's next? Hey there, James. So you think the Bills will finally beat the Chiefs in the AFC Championship? I guess this will be a game prediction question for you, James, as it relates to the AFC.
I went against the Chiefs last week, if you remember.
That is true. You did. You have said to that point, you and I have had conversations on this show while you're deliberating about the fact that this feels like a year where when it comes to Super Bowl Sunday, Kansas City is not one of the teams coming out of the tunnel. But a lot's happened since then. We've seen a lot of dynamics play out, and teams who we thought might be in their way are no longer there. So how has your answer changed?
I would say I think Buffalo wins this game. And it's for a few reasons. One, what we saw them do in Buffalo earlier in the year, it wasn't that Mahomes turned the ball over in that game, but Buffalo does turn the ball over a lot, but for some reason Chiefs still haven't. Texans turned the ball over a lot, and they couldn't get one against Mahomes and company. But Josh made plays when he had to make plays in the fourth quarter, and that's usually when teams come up short. I don't think that impacts Allen really anymore. And they're so diplomatic in how they operate their passing game that, like, Trent McDuffie's like a top tier corner in this league. But you can avoid them because they don't force the ball anywhere. There's no Stephon Diggs. They go to anybody else that's open. And their offensive line is outstanding. And that defensive line is the strength of the way, Kansas City plays defense. So, I think this might be the year, actually. And it's going to be in like the least heroic looking play that we've seen in Josh Allen, right? Don't you just feel like there's a calmer sense to the way he plays now?
I do. I was actually just thinking that. I said it in years past, it's felt like he's had moments in the postseason where, and partially because of the supporting cast that's been around him or the dynamics, on offense, but he's kind of had to play hero ball and really just try to put the weight of the world on his shoulders. And now it feels a little bit more calm and methodic, and you remove a number one talent like Stephon Diggs, and yet everything seems to be more cohesive. Yeah, it's made them better and more cohesive and a little bit harder to defend in the sense of, like, they have a lot of guys that can do a lot of things, and no one really stands out as a clear-cut kind of number one option. And especially what I feel like I see a difference from Josh Allen in is on third downs. It just feels like he's like hunting on third downs, where he says, this is my down, and I'm prepared to get it myself or to find an option to do it. But we are getting a first down here, and more often than not, he's successful in it. Yeah,
he's outstanding in it. I'd say, like, them and the Eagles have cheat codes on third and short. Like, they're getting it, right? They're going to get it. And, I just think Josh is a little bit different this year. I don't know. If he doesn't get it, I don't know when he does. But, he seems different this year.
Trey, what do we got next? Any insight on who Denver is looking at for their special teams coordinator position?
I mean, obviously, Banjo's one of the guys that you can look at. Sean has had success, if you look at Zach already, like in former players that have played under him, understanding how he wants things done and understanding how he wants things to be taught and coached. And I think if you talk to guys on that offensive line and the way they talk about Zach Strief, like to me, that's just a perfect example of, like, here's a guy that I had. He knows the way I want to do it. Like, and he does a really, really good job. Like, he's very quickly becoming a really, really good offensive line coach. And if that's any indication for, like, Chris's sake, that you'd be like, oh, okay, I could see that. But obviously there's the Rizzy, situation. If Alvin Kamara has any dog in the fight, he'll want to keep Darren Rizzy in New Orleans, as he just tweeted that out a little bit ago. He said, my new head coach of the Saints, I would like it to rhyme with Fizzy.
Fizzy, yep.
But, I mean, he obviously has ties to Sean, too. I don't think you make that move without knowing exactly who you want to put in place.
Yeah, and it was always kind of an interesting situation in special teams here with the Broncos, because you had kind of the Westhoff and Katwika. You had
like a package deal in a sense.
Yeah, I equated it to, like, it had to feel a little bit like in The Office when Michael Scott and Jim Halpert are like co-managers, and it's like, well, I'm big picture and you're more day to day, and it's just like I don't know. So I agree with you. I think that
I'd say those are the two front runners, really. And if he lands Rizzy, that's a huge get.
Yeah.
A huge get.
Yeah, because that's a name that's picked up a lot of steam even before Alvin Kamara is, tweeting his stamp of approval.
Beloved guy in that building. I mean, beloved in that building in New Orleans.
Trey, what's up? What do we got next? If you were a part of the Broncos staff from Roy, what position group would you go after with the first round pick at number 20?
Well, if the Warren kid's sitting there at 20, like
tight end,
you take him, the kid from Penn State.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like that's a no-brainer. But like, there's nobody else at the tight end position you're taking in the first round, probably. So like, I would obviously look there. I know it sounds crazy, but like, I'd always be looking to get more offensive line depth. 100%. I'm of the model, and just outside of pick 20, like the people I talk to around the league that I always respect in the way that they go about the draft process is like, you should pick offensive linemen and corners in almost every single draft. Every year. Like, you should, because depth is always needed with both those positions, and you can find guys in other rounds outside of the first in both those positions that can be really, really great players for you. I think those are spots that I always look. I like the roster's put together well. Like 20, I'm looking at this is a poor wide receiver class. Like Steve does a lot of work on our show. Steve Smith, my co-host on our show, and he was like, there were guys in this draft this year that were undrafted wide receivers that will go in the 3rd and 4th round this year.
Wow,
like that type of talent. If that shows you where,
and that's just the nature of the cycle, right?
Yes,
you can't just like you can't, it always comes into question when you're evaluating, do we draft a quarterback? Do you not? Well, you can't choose when you suck, and eventually when you need you need some of these things. So
and then inside linebackers a need, but you're not picking that at 20.
No running back consideration there.
I mean, you see who's there, I guess. I think our mindset on the running back has changed. Which I do think the perception of that has dramatically changed. I talked to Joe Mixon about that actually after the game. I was like, bro, you're one of the guys. Like, and he's like, that was our goal, man. We're on a group chat. Like him, Derrick Henry, Saquon, Josh Jacobs, all these guys.
Saquon definitely pulling a lot of legwork in that. Derrick Henry,
all of these guys were cast off from their team. All 4 of them that I mentioned. And they all played great this year. And so there is a lot of hope that the perception of the position changes. You got to see who's there. But like, a running back in the first round is no longer probably an outlier anymore. I would say this, here's a great point back to Monday night. Like Travion Henderson is becoming the back that I think is becoming the NFL norm. And Travion Henderson is, no knock on him, but like the poor man's Jahmyr Gibbs. Like that athlete that can beat you from a variety of ways, from a variety of spots on the field, explosiveness, pass catching ability. Like that back is becoming very popular, I'd say, as well. So like Travion Henderson is an interesting guy that we should watch in this draft for sure. Like he's one of those examples, right, of what we're talking about.
Yes.
To give us an idea of how the position's changing. And then the Boise kid obviously is like
Genty,
player. Genty's a great player.
Yeah. Troy, let's see if we can't get a couple more here. James, how do you feel about Ibuka's pro potential? We kind of touched on that, but just to reiterate.
I'll go quick on it.
Ohio State guy.
I mean, I think to understand your role in the NFL is huge, and not every guy coming out is going to be a one. There's one stay on teams for a long time. So how do you do well with, not being a volume catcher, which Mbuka is very good at. If you don't get targets for stretches of a game, can you still make plays? Yeah. I think his pro potential is really good because he got decent size, and then he's a very willing blocker. He's a very willing type of player. Not to make another comparison, but he's kind of like a poor man's Amon-Ra St. Brown in a sense, in the way that he plays the game.
I would take a lot of poor man examples that you've said so far. Because
I take the 1B.
Even at a poor man level, that's still going to be pretty productive based on the names that you mentioned. Exactly. How about one more, Trey? On the way out, let's see here. We got anything from David or from Roy?
Are those the only 2 people watching, David and Roy, right now?
No, we got. It looks like there's like 9 or 10 questions in there. That some of them have multiples, So our guy Trey here is just James. Why do we need a chain gang on the field when the USFL uses a laser to see first downs? If I'm not mistaken, that kind of goes along with what I touched on, James. I guess if I can add some context or some to David's question there, do you see a world in the near future where the NFL fully embraces a lot of the technological advancements that we see, and we no longer are pining over certain things? And that could be from replay review on all flags thrown, or something in New York initiations that aren't predicated whether a flag's been thrown or not, first down markings, things like that.
Yeah, so the first thing that the league discusses in the offseason when they go over this is how to make sure that any of these adjustments that they're trying to make don't change the pace of play. And so that's one of the big things that they always want to make sure that they evaluate, that whatever they're trying to adjust, that the pace of play stays the same. Because the game is actually moving along, in their minds, relatively quickly. I would say compared to the college game, definitely relatively quickly. And so that's like one of the first things if you're evaluating any sort of change. Can we still do it in an expedited amount of time? They don't want to overly rely on New York for a lot of things. They want it to be, break glass case scenario.
Sure.
But I think as like, I hate to use this as an example, but like as gambling is becoming so much more prevalent, as fantasy is becoming so much more prevalent, and these are the main two like revenue generators that are starting to really rear their heads so much into the NFL connection, that like you have to make sure you do things the right way, not just for just the results on the field. And so I do think there will be added pressure, is the point I'm getting at, on making sure some of these things change. I would not be surprised if the chain gang's gone in the next 3 years.
3 years too long, in my opinion. Well, well, James, as always, it is a pleasure catching up with you. Your insight and thoughts about things going on all around the league are just great to be able to share with our audience. I certainly pick up a little bit each and every time we chat. And the next time we chat, we'll get to react to what will be the Super Bowl matchup, which is just a few weeks away.
Are you going to be in New Orleans, Richie?
I'm not. I wish. I mean, you never know, right? Fingers crossed, things could change. But as of now, I will be planted probably firmly, in 2 feet down in Denver on Super Bowl Sunday. But you never know. My boss, Amanda, if she's listening, I would go.
Hi,
I would
Amanda.
go. Yeah. So, James, as always, it's a pleasure chatting with you. We will catch up again next week, okay?
Sounds good, brother.
Awesome.
Right.
Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
See ya.